Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor is a 2008 action fantasy film once again starring Brendan Fraser as the ever-illustrious Rick O'Connell, and it is the third official film in the Mummy trilogy. And this time it takes a sidestep away from Egypt in order to focus on a less than typical version of a mummy now found in ancient China. This is where an evil emperor played by Jet Li used to rule, and if he's resurrected, he'll rule the land, and Rick is the only knowledgeable person who's able to stop this mummy, having done it twice before. Before we continue on to this review, I kind of have to give a huge shout out and thanks to Jacob Martin, who is once again joining me on another mummy review. We're actually almost done with these reviews because we will be revisiting the Tom Cruise version next time, so make sure you don't miss out on that one by hitting that subscribe button and the bell to be notified when that pops up. But yeah, we'll be hearing what Jacob has to say about The Mummy 3 in just a hot second! Although, I have to admit, I'm getting some flashbacks to when we reviewed the Pink Panther series together because, for the most part, we often agreed on all of those, except for the rare instances where we really disagreed. And this is going to be one of those times, since he really doesn't care for the film for the most part, while I had a good time with it. Not great like the first one, but significantly more than the second one, which for me was just mostly a nothing film, rehashing everything from the first. This was actually pretty original in its approach, as it borrows from ancient Chinese mythology. If you've ever heard of the Terracotta Army, Wikipedia says the Terracotta Army is a collection of terracotta sculptures depicting the armies of the first emperor of China. It is a form of funerary art buried with the emperor in 210 to 209 BCE with the purpose of protecting the emperor in his afterlife. It might be called something else in this movie, and it might be embellished with fantasy hoopla, but that's what it was, and I have always loved that terracotta army. Whenever it shows up in movies, I'm just a happy camper. And to see that the mummy in this movie is basically a walking, talking, cursed version of one of those sculptures, I thought that was really cool. I'm also a pretty massive fan of Jet Li in general, but this and Lethal Weapon 4 are prime examples of when I couldn't really care that it was him. I mean, he did fine in everything, he did. But the movie is making the claim that a regular everyday Joe, like Brendan Fraser or Mel Gibson in Lethal Weapon, could take on Jet Li. And I'm sorry, but that makes me giggle. But I did like his character, and I like the fact that you're taking a fun Asian stereotype, like the whole air, water, fire, ice bending stuff, and turning it into reality. I think that that's awesome. Also, there's a lot of great action scenes in this film that are a lot of fun to watch, and I'd even venture to say memorable. I haven't seen this in years, and there were a few scenes in there that I had a lot of fun with because I could actually remember them. The movie also looks nice in general. The visuals I didn't think were bad. I think that's one of the disagreements that Jacob's going to have, but my stance is just that the last two Mummy movies had atrocious early PlayStation graphics, and this was a step up from that. Does the visuals work for 2022? No, not really, but in comparison to the other Mummy movies, well, they were noticeably better. Now, before I continue on with my portion of the review, I'm going to shoot it over to Jacob to hear his thoughts. Take it away, man.
What's going on, Dave and all his viewers? Thank you for inviting me on your channel once again, continuing into our deep dive into the Mummy franchise. So, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. This is the third film in the Brendan Fraser-led Mummy trilogy. Unlike the first two, this was not directed by Stephen Sommers. This was instead directed by Rob Cohen, who previously directed the first Fast and Furious movie. And this is a movie I've probably seen the least amount of times in this trilogy that I grew up with, because I love the first movie. The second one I have issues with, but it's still enjoyable for what it is. This one, I have never really liked, even when I first saw the movie, around the time the Tomb of the Dragon Emperor came out. Something about this one just felt off to me compared to the other two Mummy films. So I haven't seen this movie in a good, I don't know, 10 years, over 10 years since I've seen this movie. I was curious how I'd feel about this movie on rewatch because it's been so long. And to be honest, I'm not that crazy about this movie. I can see why it's considered the weakest of the Mummy trilogy. I know some people really hated this film, and I saw it has like a 12% on Rotten Tomatoes. So not too many people like Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. which is a shame because there's seeds of a really good movie in here. I like that they're trying to explore different mythology within the lore of the Mummy, because the first two movies, it was all about Imhotep and Egyptian mythology, and one of the biggest complaints The Mummy Returns had was that it felt like a rehash of the first and just not as good. So I get that they're trying to do something different. They're trying to do Chinese mythology, and we got an emperor that gets unearthed and buried, and his mummy comes out, and he wants to conquer the world once again. That stuff is fascinating. In fact, I actually do like the backstory for the Emperor character played by Jet Li, and the history with him and this woman that's toe-to-toe against him who's played by Michelle Yeoh. It's always great seeing those two actors on screen, even if this movie's not near as good. I do like the backstory behind the Emperor and the history of the mythology of the Emperor as a character. There was good potential with this story. Also, it's cool seeing Brendan Fraser back as Rick O'Connell. That's always a plus. And Jonathan is also in this movie. That character is always enjoyable to see. And the back and forth between those two characters was had some of the best laughs in this movie. This movie definitely isn't near as consistent in laughs as the previous two did, but whenever humor is sprinkled in the film, it's always pretty welcoming. But there is a lot of stuff that really hurts this movie. One, this movie is not near as fun as its two predecessors. In fact, I was pretty bored by most of this movie. Yeah, the action sequences are pretty decently handled, but they don't have that same sense of fun that Stephen Sommers brought in the previous two Mummy movies. The CGI has not aged well at all in this movie. I don't think any of these effects look any bad than The Rock as the Scorpion King at the end of The Mummy Returns, but there are still some really bad CGI in this movie, especially when we see Jet Li's mummy persona roam around. It looks laughably bad at times. It doesn't look convincing at all. And then my big issue is they waste Jet Li as a character because he morphs around in CGI form for most of the movie, and Jet Li only has like one big action scene, which is near the end of the film, and it's not even that well crafted of an action scene because of the quick cut editing, which is a waste of his craftsmanship as an action star. But yeah, the CGI is not good. The Emperor keeps morphing into CGI creatures to and fro throughout the course of this movie. There's even one shot where he morphs into a three-headed dragon, and we see a shot of 3 Jet Li heads turning into a dragon. And yeah, that'll haunt my nightmares for a week. My other big issue with this movie is the family drama is pretty hollow in this movie. For some reason, even though this film came out in 2008, 7 years after the release of Mummy Returns, they decided to set the story like 12 years later. So Rick and Evie are supposed to be a lot older. Their son has grown up at this point, but because the movie was released like 7 years after Mummy Returns, and Rick and Evie look like they haven't aged that much. It was kind of jarring to see, they're supposed to have an older son who's grown up now, and there's like this intense family drama, but it just never felt earned or believable because the characters Rick and Evie look like they've aged like, I don't know, 5 years compared to, it's supposed to be like 12 years. It was not believable at all. I didn't care for the family drama. I thought the son grown up, that story was not interesting in the slightest. I thought the character was absolute snooze. I didn't care for his story and the drama with him and his parents. I think it would have been better if you had maybe the actor in the last movie, but as a teenager, I think that might have been more believable. But they cast somebody else, and it just was not the same. Speaking of recast, why in the heck would you recast Rachel Weisz? Especially 2 movies in, and you see the great chemistry that she and Brendan Fraser have had in this movie. Maria Bello, I know, is a good actress. I've seen her in other movies, and she's really good. Look no further than Prisoners if you want proof of that. But she does not fit the role of Evie at all. The chemistry is just not there between the 2 actors, and honestly feels like a completely different character at times because it doesn't feel like Evie. Maybe if Maria Bello played a different character who was paired with Brendan Fraser, it would have been more believable. But she's supposed to be playing Evie, and it just doesn't work because The chemistry's not there, and Maria Bello just doesn't have the same wit and charm that Rachel Weisz brought in the previous two movies. And that miscast was a big detriment to the whole movie for me, because I love Rachel Weisz in the previous two films, and this recast just did not work. Now, I did look up why she didn't return. There were two reasons. I think she claimed there was problems with the script that she didn't really like, and she didn't want to be a part of the film. And there was another reason. She just had her son. She just got out of a pregnancy, and she didn't really want to do it at this time. And that begs the question, why couldn't you have just delayed the film to give Rachel Weisz more time to take care of her personal stuff so she can return to the film with Brendan Fraser? That really baffles me. I don't really get why you decided to rush this person, recast one of the key components to why the Mummy movies work, and then it's no wonder why this movie turned out as weak as it did, why it's considered the worst of these Mummy films, especially in this iteration of the franchise. Yeah, The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor is not good. I will give it credit for trying to do something different with the Chinese mythology compared to the Egyptian mythology in the previous two films. There's seeds of a good movie in here. I think if you better executed some of the talents, like if you gave Jet Li more awesome action, if you embraced the Chinese mythology a lot more, maybe if you waited a bit for Rachel Weisz to agree to be on this movie and have her and Brendan Fraser do their awesome stuff. If you tweak the storyline, maybe set it 7 years after Mummy Returns and the son would be a teenager and the family drama would have been more believable, this would be a better movie. I think there's seeds of a good movie in here, but the execution was very poor, and I was overall very bored with this Mummy flick. I will say it's better than the Tom Cruise one at least. I'll give it that, but yeah, this movie's not good. Easily the weakest of these three Mummy films with Brendan Fraser. And unfortunately, I'll be giving The Mummy, Tomb of the Dragon Emperor a 2.5 out of 5 stars. And on the 100-point scale, it's getting a 43 out of 100. Once again, big thanks to Dave for inviting me on your channel to review these Mummy films. This one might not have been good, but it's been a blast going through all these Mummy movies with you. And I'll admit, I'm not that excited about revisiting the infamous Tom Cruise-led Mummy film, but if it makes for an entertaining review, then I'm excited to share my thoughts on this infamous disaster of a movie. So, Dave, I'm curious what your thoughts on this one's going to be, so I won't hog up too much of your time. Back to you.
Thank you to Jacob. I really enjoyed hearing your thoughts on this third Mummy film, and I'm pretty intrigued to hear what your thoughts are going to be on the remake thing that they did. That should be interesting. But yeah, overall, we disagree with this film, but I do understand where you're coming from quite a bit, actually, especially when it comes down to the recasting of Evie. What a travesty. This woman, like you said, Jacob, not necessarily a bad actress, but she annoyed the living heck out of me in this film, almost like she was making fun of Rachel Weisz's character. You know what she kind of reminded me of? Like, if Brendan Fraser had a really big fan, like obsessed with him, and for whatever god-awful reason, they hired her to play this character, and so she played it, but she did it horribly. They had no chemistry, she got in the way, it was not good. Jacob, you'd also mentioned bringing back the original child actor to play their son again, instead of who they got to play more of an adult version of their son. I disagree. Their son, in part 2 specifically, was basically Evie in this. Annoying. I didn't mind him so much in this movie, actually. He kind of reminded me of Indiana Jones to a degree, so he's a lot more suave, quite a bit more calm, but smart in what he was doing. They didn't give this character a lot of screen time, so he didn't really get to shine all that much. But, you know, I did like his character overall and how it was set up, but overall I think the movie is, you know, solid. When you compare it to the other Mummy films, you might end up hating it, but on its own, I think it works. The jokes aren't as natural as they've been in the past. They're not as good as they could be. There's not really any sense of horror anymore. The recasting thing was a giant misstep overall. They should have really just waited for Rachel Weisz to come back if they could. But overall, it's not bad. The adventure's fun, it's recognizable, it's relatable, the action's fun too. No, it can't hold a candle to the first. It never was going to be, but I highly prefer it over the second. Let's pop up my final score for a second, which was a B- letter grade with a number score of 73%, which for me is pretty average overall. It means that the movie's fun, but nothing you need to concern yourself with too much. My unbiased score for it was 66%, while my biased score was 80, meaning I definitely enjoyed it for what it was, even though it had its technical issues as well. And that's it. Those were mine and Jacob's thoughts for The Mummy: Tomb of the Dragon Emperor. If you're interested, go ahead and check out Jacob's channel, send him some love, and tell him who sent ya. You know, I've left a link to his channel in my description box below, and I would also like to hear your thoughts on the Mummy trilogy in general. Which one's your favorite? Which one's your least favorite? Let me know, and as for YouTube, you guys know what to do. Hit the like, hit the subscribe button, and hit the bell to be notified when I come out with my next review. Until then, peace out.